Okay, I proceed to clarify now um, a few more things regarding the effects. When we talked about mortal sin, uh, it really is very bad because um, there is a death that we mentioned. And that death, RIP, rest in peace, is really turning away from God. There's no possible relationship if we have committed this sin, grave matter, full knowledge, and full consent. You know, the Catechism of the Catholic Church imposes even something quite tough, you know, and perhaps um, we sometimes are accused of this. You know, this is an Opus Dei doctrine, people say, because we say it in doctrine classes, and perhaps the others may have not echoed it too much. You know, it's not mentioned in homilies, but this is the teaching of the Holy Catholic Church. Okay, when a person has committed a mortal sin, for example, he remains outside what we call the escugi, a state of grace, and because of that, if that is not redeemed by repentance and God's forgiveness, he is excluded from Christ's kingdom and eternal death of hell. And with that, the church says in the Catechism point, I mentioned the point, give me a second, 1452 and 1457, okay, he cannot receive communion. Okay, if a person is in the state of mortal sin, it's not Opus Dei doctrine, it's the Catechism. No, the person better skip Holy Communion, except for a reasonable cause. Now, what do they mean by a reasonable cause? For example, he really tried to go to the confessor and it was not possible. Or because some children are watching them, parents, and they tried all the things already, they can receive communion. I say this example, for example, the first holy communicants. The parents, we give them time, space, but sometimes it is last minute, he already tried, oh, he received communion, and then go to confession after, because it's such a solemn moment for the kid. Okay, so there are, you would say, exceptions to the rule, but that is the rule. But it is signifying something deep. No, it's not just, oh, if I committed or sin, hindi na ako pwede mag-communion. Sayang, ay additional bread rin yan. It's the most shallow thing. No? That one, the communion is communion with God. No, in loss of union with Christ, we lose the communion with His mystical body as well, the church. And we lose all the merits, although we can easily gain with the forgiveness of sins. There is that disorder likewise, and there is a diminished desire to do good. It's a loss of charity. Okay? There's a loss of charity, and there's a privation of that grace, the sanctifying grace.
Someone asked, is it called a material or objective sin, Father?
Okay, what makes a sin a mortal sin? The gravity of the matter that is concerned, the deliberate consent, and then the fullness of the knowledge as he does that.
Is
So
it
if
called a material or objective sin?
uh, I'm not familiar with that terminology. Is it objectively a sin? No, it cannot be separated. This is how I see it. It cannot be separated from the subject. Now, meaning we cannot define these are the sins that are mortal sins. No, as simple as that. We cannot have a list of these because, as I mentioned, the subject has to be with full knowledge and full consent. And sometimes, and this is good to think also, no, because of lack formation, they don't know it's wrong. Okay, it's good to think of this as we also deal with how society is. We are 500 years in the Christianity, but people still don't know some important or essential matters, even in morality. And sometimes it's good, okay, maybe because of the lack of that knowledge, because of the lack of formation, maybe they can receive communion. Because normally it's the for a person information, it's bakit sila nagko-communion? And we are so bothered with this, no? And I know that they did something. Well, we don't know. We cannot judge. The subject is important in every mortal sin. Okay? So the gravity of the matter, that one has some certain objectivity, definitely. Okay, I revert back, however, no, meaning we continue to catechize, to teach people these same things, huh? Now, because they need to know that they are committing mortal sins, if ever. Okay, why? Because they need to know the teachings of Christ, because they need to be happy. Okay, okay,
Father, I have a question.
go, Joe.
Again, so if the person is ignorant when he committed the sin, it's not mortal. And let's say with all those how do you say it, factors, it's not mortal sin. And then after that, nag-formation clash or whatever, and nalaman niya na it's a mortal sin. What can the person do after that?
Okay, the person in the normal circumstances should go to confession and just say sorry to God for that. Okay, but the Lord has understood her dispositions, her predicaments, because she did not know it was wrong. Okay, okay, meaning that's why the ignorance part, no, we have to also put some nuance there, because there's culpable ignorance, there's an inculpable one, no? And sometimes people, they don't, they were invited, for example, to a doctrine class and they don't want, no? I'm not blaming them, no? Pero there was already an opportunity for them to know some good things here, and they neglected it, no? And I think our Lord also considers those factors. Okay, and that because of that ignorance that was culpable, because it was given to them in their catechism days, in the religion classes in school, they also have something to answer to God with, with the things that they do. Okay. Anyway, effect of venial sin is next. Okay. It weakens charity. Okay, I look at the slide now. Okay, it weakens charity. It impedes the soul's progress. And it even disposes to, not moral, mortal sins. And this is the bad thing with venial sins. Although they may not have completely stopped us or made us die in front of God, they dispose us to greater evils, and including mortal sins. And if the mortal sin has what you call an eternal punishment, we mentioned earlier, it's hell. This one, the venial sins, have a temporal punishment, which is removed with what you call remission of temporal sins. What do you call that?
Indulgence.
Indulgence, thank you. In the religion classes, they taught us there are 3 types of sins: mortal, grave, and venial. Now, this doctrine of the 3 types of sins comes from a very pernicious teaching called the fundamental option. Okay, look at your slide. They define it, the fundamental option, as the act or an act of radical and total opposition to God that is a fundamental option for mortal sin. And that one is what entails what you call mortal sin. It's very difficult. In other words, for a person to commit mortal sin, he has to really hate God at the very start. If a person has not hated God from the start, he can only commit grave sins. So pwede mag-communion pa. That's an error. Okay? It's impossible, they say, to fall into mortal sin in the course of daily actions because a person is naturally good. Because a person has good dispositions to start with. Okay? So that's an error. It overlooks freedom in specific individual actions. It says that because of the fundamental option, I choose God, even I committed an act that is seemingly bad, it can only be classified as grave. Okay? This is a problem in theology, moral theology, that St. John Paul II raised in one of the documents entitled Veritatis Splendor. It's really good. It is very clear. The St. John Paul II has very, very clear ideas about this. Okay, not a fundamental option, because even in the act, even if he did not hate God at the onset, in its onset, it could be so grave for him that you need to go and ask pardon for that in the sacrament of reconciliation. Okay? Okay. With the 2 classifications of sin that I said, mortal and venial, you're okay already. But just for you to know, there are many other classifications of sin Okay. Okay. You are looking at the screen, I hope. Okay. There is a difference between actual and what is the contrary to actual? Kaya, ritual. Ritual. This is a distinction simply of theologians to say there's the sin that is in act and there's what is a remnant of what you did. It's the habitual sin, it's the punishment, and it's the stain that is after habitual sin. Okay. There's a personal sin versus what do you think is the other one if it's not a personal sin? Original sin. Original sin. Okay, it's a distinction of theologians simply to say that the personal sin is a sin of yours, and but when you are born, you have a sin that was carried on to you, transmitted to you, as a human being because of our first parents who committed sin in their origins. That's why a person after being born is baptized, cleansed from original sin. Okay, there's external versus internal. I think it's very easy. It's an easy distinction. There are sins that are actualized outside the person, but there are also sins that are in thought only. Okay, carnal versus
Spiritual.
Spiritual.
spiritual. Spiritual. Okay, now there are sins that are related to the sensible appetites versus the sins that are deeper because they are with respect to the soul. And normally they are tougher to combat. For example, pride. And then the sample of carnal, lust. And the pride is definitely more difficult. Okay. And then the commission versus
Omission.
omission. Thank you. I think you find this distinction quite easy because there's things or sins you commit versus activities you simply omit. You know, it's beautiful because in the Mass, we say sorry. I confess to Almighty God and to you, my brothers and sisters, I have greatly sinned. Yung greatly na yun sa datin, ang ganda. Anyway, greatly sinned in my thoughts, in what I have, in my words, what I have done, omission, and what I have failed to do. And then what do? Through my fault, dati tatlong beses pa nga, through my fault, voluntary, it's my fault, through my own grievous fault. Anyway, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. When you attend Mass, even online, I try to say that, relish those words. Now that we don't have access to the sacrament of reconciliation. Okay. I proceed. Okay. Well, this sins has its own trajectory, its own, you would say, way of spreading. It creates a proclivity. Now, sins create a proclivity to do the same thing. Just like virtue, the good cycle, when you do something good and you are habituated to it, the same way, in the contrary, when you do something bad, you are more prone to commit the same thing. So sin engenders itself. And such repetition can become a habit, and it is called vice. Vicio, in the theological sense. Okay, vice, so called vice. Perverse inclinations which cloud our conscience and they corrupt the concrete judgment of good and evil. It reproduces itself, it reinforces itself. And that's why as early, in the early years of our formation of our friends, it's good always to start well. Because when they go into that cycle, it's sometimes tougher to take them out. There has to be a guide, really patient, or there has to be grace, a stronger grace, to take them out of a vicious cycle called the cycle of sin. Now, aside from that, there are what you call tradition calls capital sins. These are personal sins, especially incline one to further sins. Pelagius. I write it down. There you can recall. Pride, actually, it's a source of all sin. The part of that aversion, there is always pride in every sin. Avarice, a source of sin, exotic concerns. Anyway, lust, this one is anger, akaw, gluttony, envy, and then tamad, katamaran, sloth. So these sins, can be connected to all the other sins and could make, in fact, one go into a vicious cycle that's so dangerous for the spiritual life. Okay, I would like to highlight here this one, sloth, because all of us tend towards it, all the more in a quarantine mode. Now, it's good to examine our conscience now. Whether is it really the situation or is it our voluntariness that brings us slothful? And many times we could also do things that are more productive, more engaging, more for the glory of God. Okay, that's about the proliferation of sin. Okay. Father, how does that start? You all know because you and I have been also in this journey to prodigal son, sometimes worse and sometimes on a more shallow way. But it starts just like in Adam and Eve's case with temptations. In the context of cause of sin, we need to speak of temptations. Okay, and these are the root of all sins, which actually lie. The temptation happens in the heart of man. As the Catechism states, our heart can be attracted to the presence of a parent because normally there is a fraudulent action that is being proposed to us. Now, all these things are good, but if it's not taken at the right time, for example, sexuality or the act itself, doing it, sex, is good, it's very holy. But if a person advances it, they're not yet married, or they're not quote unquote in a relationship, then definitely it's grave in God's eyes. But it is good in itself. So in the deception, no, is what you call the temptation. You will be like gods, the same way as Adam and Eve were tempted. And we always are deceived. We are always tempted constantly, constantly. And there are elements in this world that makes us, quote unquote, veer away from loving God. Now, in tradition, there are three that could sort of, you would say, that summarizes this. And it is located in John, the first letter of John, letter or epistle we were mentioning earlier, chapter 2, verse 16. But we have here the world, the devil, and the third,
Lust.
and the flesh.
Flesh.
World, the devil, and the flesh. 1 John chapter 2, verse 16. When you say the world, this is not in reference to God's creation because it is so good as far as disperse us. This order of sin, turn to creatures, but these are the things in their disordered love. When it comes to the devil, as we saw in Genesis already, as we see also in this day and age, the devil works. He tempts us really. He's so cunning, very bright, not in a good sense, but he can easily fool us to these goods of this world. Okay, I'll share with you an anecdote. Like I say, the devil can easily really possess somebody and his own trickery. Now, once I was in a confessional, in an undertaking of Opus Dei. Maybe you heard me say this already, but anyway. And then they told me, Father, the next one is a possessed girl. Was a possessed girl. So I said, wait a minute. I don't know how to exercise. No, I don't have that quote unquote gift given by the parish or something. No? And I said, but I can hear confessions. I can forgive sins because God's giving. And then, but if something happens in this confession, you open the door a bit, put it ajar, and I will shout because if something happens, then I need help to contain this lady who was possessed. Anyway, so the confession happened, and then I returned after some time in the same undertaking, and I asked, how was she? And definitely I was given this news. I'm so happy. Everything went well after the confession. You know, the devil really can possess us. He's so powerful. But if we give him the reins in the sins itself, the devil can use his power all the more in many other things. Okay, I just mentioned that because if we don't give in to his wiles, many times we have the power really for many other things. No? We are protected, his possession, etc. Anyway, just to share with you. And then the flesh, ourselves, likewise, because of our past sins, it also is a source of temptation. Okay. Now, there is a slide here that has a video. Kasi I know that as we talk about sins, you might be saying, "Eh, wala namang confession, etc., etc." I want you to watch what the Holy Father said in a homily last year, as you and I perhaps find it difficult to locate priests. Because even in your parishes, I think, most likely, they're not offering it. I know that UANP, for example, the corporate Argentine Opposites is closed even for this. Hopefully by May 1, we will go back to work. Anyway, so
During his homily at Casa Santa Marta, the Pope spoke of God's call to his people to return to him. He said God's tenderness speaks in a special way during Lent, a time to reflect and remember to return to the Father, who has the power to cleanse sinners.
Lui è capace di trasformarci, lui è capace di cambiare il cuore, ma ci vuole dare il primo passo, tornare. Non è andare da Dio, no, è tornare a casa.
Then he addressed the problem of not being able to see a priest for confession, which many Catholics do during Lent in preparation for Easter.
Se tu non trovi un sacerdote per confessarti, parla con Dio, è il tuo padre, e dire la verità: Signore, ho combinato questo. Scusami, e chiedergli perdono con tutto il cuore, con l'atto di dolore, e promettergli: dopo mi confesserò, ma perdonami adesso, e subito tornerai alla grazia di Dio.
In this time of crisis, the Pope said the Catechism clearly teaches that one can draw near to God's forgiveness even without a priest at hand.
Che Dio ci abbracci